Hello, my name is Julie and welcome to this YSJ.net tutorial. Here we are going to learn how to create a data grid view. We'll learn how to populate the data grid view both with bound and unbound data.
Now that we've added our button, let's go ahead and do something a little bit more advanced. We're going to add a data grid view. And I'm actually going to go ahead and create a new page to put this on. So if I right click over here on tutorial project, I can click on add and then new item. We're going to add a page. So let's select YSJ.net 4, empty page. We'll just call it page 2. And click add. And you can see here's page 2. It looks just like page 1. It also has a designer file and a resx file. Let's go ahead and open the toolbox. So click down here to show the toolbox and click up here. We're going to search for data grid view and click and drag to place it. So a data grid view is a table essentially. You can think of it sort of like an Excel table where you can have columns and rows. And there are two different ways you can add data to it. You can have bound data and unbound data. We're going to do unbound data first because that's simpler. So I need to add some columns here. So if I click on my data grid view, so it gets this highlight around it, and then click on this arrow up here, I can click on edit columns. And you notice there's a plus sign here. If you click, you'll notice there's a lot of options here. We're just going to keep it simple. We're going to do a data grid view text box column. So that's called column 0. If you look over here, there's all the properties of that column. So I can rename it if I want to. Although I'm just going to keep it as column 0. And then I'm going to add a second column, again, a text box column. And so that one is column 1. I'm done editing my columns now, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And if I click over here, you can see that's what my data grid view looks like. Now if I go to run this, you'll see we have a slight problem. We still see our button. That's because we created a new page, page 2, and it's loading page 1. So if I go to let's see, if I go to program.cs, you can see here it says new page1.show. I'm going to change that to page 2. Control S to save. Hit play. And now we can see our data grid view. So you can see we've got no data in here. We just have our 2 columns. So let's go ahead and add some data. So let me go back to page 2. So if you remember from before, we added an event for the button. I'm going to go ahead and add an event for the page. If you click over here, you'll highlight the data grid view. If you click over here, you'll just be on the page. So when I'm on the page, you can see the properties of the page, including the lightning bolt, which has the page events such as load. So I'm going to double click on that. So this code will run whenever the page loads. This code up here is the page constructor, and then this here is when the page loads. So this code would run first, this code would run second. So let's go ahead and add some code here. So data grid view 1 is our data grid view, and if you're curious about what your data grid view is called, if we go back to our page 2 and click on this, you can see it's called data grid view 1. So that's where I got that from. And then dot rows accesses the rows, dot add adds a row, and I'm just going to add a row with 2 things in it, the number 1 and the word Alice, and then add a second row that has the number 2 and the word Bob. So now if I run this, you can see it says 1 Alice, 2 Bob. So there's our data grid view. So that is unbound data. So let's go ahead and add some bound data. Let's add a second data grid view with some bound data. So I'm going to go and add a data grid view again. You notice this one is called Datagridview 2. It's highlighted right here, so I'm going to hit escape so it's no longer highlighted. And let's go ahead and do some things to Datagridview 2. Let's see. Before I can add data, I need to go ahead and add a new class. So this is bound data. I'm going to have a person class that the data is stored in. So I'm going to right click up here, add new item. We're going to add a class. So if I just go to C#, there's class, and we're just going to call it person. So there's our person class. We're just going to keep this pretty simple. It just has an ID and a name property. I'm going to hit Control S to save it. So now that we have our person class, we can create a list full of person objects and then bind that list to the data grid view. So let me go back to page 2. So this is going to be our bound data. So I'm going to create my list, and I'm actually just going to create it outside of my page 2 load. So right here, so it's a binding list of type person called people list. And you'll notice I use a binding list, not a regular list. So when you add, remove, or edit items in a binding list, the data grid view updates immediately without regular code. However, with a regular list, it won't update automatically. And I can show this here. So here I set the data source to be people list. And then after I set the data source, I add people to the list. With a regular list, this wouldn't work. You'd have to add the people to the list before you set the data source. Okay, so we set the data source to be people list, and then people list.add new person name Alice ID 1, and then add new person name Bob ID 2. So let's go ahead and test this out. Okay, so you notice there is a slight problem here. It's all in the first data grid view, right? So if you look at this, you'll notice data grid view 1 data source equals people list, right? So I actually need to set data grid view 2 data source equals people list because I wanted that to be in my second data grid view. And again, if I look at my page, you can see this one is called data grid view 2. So let's go ahead and run that. And here we are. So you'll notice in the second data grid view, you remember I didn't actually create any columns manually in the designer. They get automatically created when the data is bound. So we have 2 columns, ID and name. Now let me show you one more thing. Let's go ahead and change this to be a regular list instead of a binding list, just to show you the difference. Let's see, what are we missing here? Oh, using systems.collections.generic. There we go. And you notice there's nothing in there, right? So with the regular list, I have to do it before the data source is assigned. And just to prove that to you, let me put that over here. Right, so now we're adding 2 people to the list and then assigning the data source with the regular list. And now it works again. But I'm going to go ahead and just use my binding list. And so there we have our 2 data grid views. We have an unbound data grid view over here, and we have a bound data grid view over here.